Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most epic last stands. We all know the legend of the 300 Spartans, but what's the real story behind the myth? Let's uncover the true story of the last breath of Sparta. In the year 480 BC, Western civilization hung by a thread. The Persian Empire, a colossal power led by the god king Xerxes I, had amassed the largest army the ancient world had ever witnessed. Their target, the proud, fragmented city-states of Greece. From the east, a seemingly unstoppable tide of soldiers, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, swept across the land. Hope for the Greeks was dwindling, flickering like a candle in the wind. But as history has shown us time and again, even the smallest spark can ignite an inferno of legend. While the rest of Greece wavered, one city stood defiant: Sparta. Known for its iron will and unparalleled military prowess, Sparta was not a place for hesitation. Their king, Leonidas, a seasoned warrior in his 50s with a gaze that could cut through steel, understood the gravity of the situation. The oracle at Delphi, the most revered spiritual authority in the ancient world, had delivered a chilling prophecy. Either Sparta would be razed to the ground, or a Spartan king must sacrifice himself for its salvation. For Leonidas, the path was clear. He would meet the Persians head-on. However, a major obstacle stood in his way: Spartan law. It was the time of the Carneia, a sacred religious festival during which mobilizing the full army was strictly forbidden. Faced with this dilemma, Leonidas made a legendary decision. He wouldn't take an army, he would take a personal honor guard. He handpicked 300 of his finest soldiers, each one a veteran, and crucially each one a father with a son to carry on his family name. This wasn't just a military unit, it was a statement. It was a promise of continuity, even in the face of certain death. The chosen location for this monumental stand was no accident. It was a masterstroke of military strategy. Thermopylae, a name that translates to the Hot Gates. This narrow coastal pass, hemmed in by towering cliffs on one side and the sea on the other, was the perfect choke point. Here, the Persians' overwhelming numbers would be nullified. The vast imperial army would be forced to funnel into a bottleneck where only a few men could fight at a time. It would not be a battle of numbers, but a brutal contest of skill, discipline, and raw courage. This was where the Spartan phalanx, a wall of interlocking shields and bristling spears, would prove its worth. As the Spartans and their few thousand Greek allies fortified the pass, the horizon began to darken. The Persian vanguard arrived, a terrifying spectacle of imperial might. The air grew heavy with the dust kicked up by millions of marching feet. There were the legendary immortals, Xerxes' elite bodyguard clad in golden armor, Scythian archers on horseback, warriors from every corner of the sprawling empire, from Ethiopia to India. The sheer scale and diversity of the force was meant to intimidate, to crush the spirit of the Greeks before a single blow was struck. But they weren't facing ordinary men. They were facing Spartans. For 2 full days, the impossible happened. The small Greek force held the pass against wave after wave of Persian assaults. Xerxes, watching from his throne on a nearby hill, threw his best troops into the meat grinder, and time and again they were repelled. The Spartans fought with a ferocity that bordered on the supernatural. They would feign retreat, drawing the Persians into the narrow pass, only to turn and slaughter them in a perfectly executed maneuver. The pile of bodies grew higher, forming a gruesome barricade. The Hot Gates had become a charnel house, and the legend of Spartan invincibility was being written in blood. But no fortress is impenetrable forever. The tide turned not by force, but by betrayal. A local man named Ephialtes, hoping for a rich reward from the Persian king, revealed a hidden mountain path that bypassed the Spartan position. This trail, known as the Anopeia path, would allow the Persians to encircle the Greeks and attack them from the rear. When Leonidas learned that the immortals were making their way along this secret route, he knew the end was near. His position was about to become a death trap. Faced with inevitable annihilation, Leonidas made his final heroic command. He dismissed the majority of the Greek contingent, ordering them to retreat and warn the other cities to live and fight another day. He, along with his 300 Spartans, the 700 Thespians who courageously chose to stay, and 400 Thebans, would remain. They would hold the pass to the last man. This was no longer about victory. It was about buying time. It was about honor. It was about showing the world, and Xerxes himself, the price of Greek freedom. On the third and final day, the battle reached its frenzied, tragic climax. Surrounded on all sides, the remaining Greeks fought with a desperation born of absolute resolve. Their spears shattered, their swords broke, but they fought on with their fists and their teeth. Leonidas fell, a king true to the oracle's prophecy. The Spartans fought ferociously over his body, driving the Persians back 4 times to retrieve their fallen leader. Finally pushed back to a small hillock within the pass, they made their last stand. The Persians, unwilling to close in and face their fury, stood at a distance and rained down a storm of arrows until the last Greek warrior fell. The 300 were gone. Thermopylae had fallen, but in defeat, they achieved an immortal victory. The news of their sacrifice electrified Greece. Their bravery became a rallying cry that united the divided city-states. The delay they had purchased was crucial, allowing the Athenian navy to prepare for the decisive naval battle at Salamis, where the Persian fleet would be crippled. The stand at Thermopylae wasn't the end of the war. It was the beginning of the end for the Persian invasion. It proved that the god king could bleed, that his empire was not invincible. The legacy of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans has echoed through millennia. They became the ultimate symbol of courage against overwhelming odds, of sacrificing oneself for a greater cause. A monument was later erected at the site, bearing the simple, powerful epitaph by the poet Simonides. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Their story reminds us that history is not only shaped by great armies and sweeping victories, but also by the unwavering resolve of a few who dare to stand firm when all others fall back. Their last breath became an eternal flame of freedom. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Greece. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next adventure. On the first day, the Persian assaults were an absolute slaughter. The lightly armed Persian infantry, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers, crashed against an unyielding wall of bronze and death. The Spartans' spears were longer, their bronze shields were stronger, and their discipline was perfect. They would push, strike with lethal precision, and fall back into their flawless phalanx formation. After each wave, the ground was littered with thousands of Persian dead, while the Spartans had barely broken a sweat. The narrow pass had turned the Persians' greatest advantage, their numbers, into a deadly weakness. Every charge simply fed more men into the meat grinder. Furious and humiliated, on the second day, Xerxes unleashed his elite royal guard, the legendary 10,000 immortals. The battle grew fiercer, the sounds of war more intense. The clash of shields, the roar of war cries, the sickening crunch of bone and steel echoed through the pass. Led by Leonidas himself, the Spartans fought with a controlled, almost superhuman rage. It was here they deployed their famed tactic, the feigned retreat. They would pretend to break formation and flee, luring the overconfident immortals into a disorganized chase. Then, in an instant, they would turn, reform their phalanx, and annihilate the trapped and disordered enemy. Even the best of Persia's best could not break Leonidas's men. For 2 full days, the gate to Greece, this narrow, hot gate, remained locked tight. But every fortress, no matter how strong, has a weakness, and every legend has its villain. His name was Ephialtes. He was a local man, a Malian Greek who knew the mountains like the back of his hand. Lured by the promise of immense wealth and glory from the Persian king, he revealed a secret. There was a hidden goat path, an unguarded track that wound through the mountains and came out behind the Greek position. For Xerxes, this was the key he desperately needed. For the Greeks, it was a death sentence. At dawn on the third day, the mood shifted. A lookout spotted the glint of the sun on Persian shields high on the hills behind them. They were surrounded. The trap had been sprung. Looking at the faces of the Spartans, you wouldn't see fear. You would see something else entirely. A quiet resignation, a grim acceptance, and a final unbreakable determination. They knew the end was near. Leonidas did not choose death, he chose how to die. He understood his sacrifice would buy the rest of Greece the precious time it needed to muster its full strength and unite against the invasion. That morning, he formally dismissed most of the Greek allies. He ordered them to retreat, to carry the news of their stand, and to prepare for the battles to come. But not everyone left. The 300 Spartans, bound by their law and their honor, chose to stay. With them stood 700 brave Thespians, who refused to abandon their allies, and about 400 Thebans held there somewhat reluctantly. They were no longer fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the future of their homeland, for the very idea of Greece. What followed was not a battle. It was a final, glorious act of defiance. The Spartans and their allies advanced from the narrowest part of the pass into the open, determined to inflict as much damage as possible. It was chaos. It was desperation. They fought hand to hand, their spears long shattered. They used their short swords, their daggers, and when those were lost, their bare hands and teeth. In the swirling heart of the melee, King Leonidas, pierced by a storm of arrows and spears, finally fell. In a final act of loyalty, his men roared and formed a protective circle around his body, driving the Persians back 4 times to reclaim their king. They fought on a small hill, bathed in the morning sun and their own blood, until the last man was cut down by a volley of arrows. They had slain thousands. They had humiliated a self-proclaimed god king. And in dying, they rose, forever, into the Olympus of history. Thermopylae was a tactical defeat, but it was an immortal victory for the human spirit. The sacrifice of the 300 Spartans and their allies was not in vain. The story of their incredible bravery spread like wildfire, uniting a fractured Greece against the common enemy. It inspired the stunning naval victory at Salamis and the decisive land battle at Plataea, which finally drove the Persians out of Greece for good. Their stand preserved the fragile seed of Western civilization, the democracy, philosophy, art, and culture that we often take for granted today. There's an ancient monument at the site, with an epitaph that still sends shivers down the spine. It reads, "Stranger, go tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their laws." They were not just 300 who died that day. With them, fear itself perished. From their final breath, a legend was born. A legend that nearly 3,000 years later still whispers a timeless truth, that the courage of a determined few can change the destiny of many. Traveler, may their echo never fade.